Science REU grad school panel. And so we're starting off with several faculty who have generously agreed to come speak to you guys today. For those of you who don't normally join us, just a couple of Zoom etiquette things. Please keep yourself muted unless you're talking, right? We don't want to interrupt what our speakers have to share with some erroneous noise from outside. And let's see. Oh, thank you to everyone who submitted questions on the Slido and upvoted them. We are going to pull from that list, but please speak up if it seems like we're not going to get to your question and you feel really strongly about it. Let's see. What do you think, Rennie? Should we just get started or should we wait for some more people?
I think we can get started. Just want to say for all of the students who are not part of the NSF Virtual Summer REU with the Ocean Sciences Division, funded by the Ocean Sciences Division, welcome. We do a series of professional development workshops, and this is one of them, and we're really glad you can be here. So keep in touch and let us know if you have any questions or concerns. I'll share the link to the board where you can post questions in the chat if you would have something you'd like to submit. Thank you.
So faculty, I'd like to start by having you all introduce yourselves. So if you could give your name, your current position and institution, and then a little bit about your area of research, just so the students can hear where you're coming from. And I'm going to just go in the order that you guys were listed in the email. So it's going to be Dr. Zackrell, then Dr. Garza, then Dr. Smith, and then Padilla Gamillo. Does that sound good?
Hi, I'm Danielle Zackrell. I have been a professor for about 17 years at California State University, Fullerton, which is just outside of Los Angeles in Northern Orange County. And I study conservation ecology and population biology of native and non-native oysters. I'm interested in restoration techniques for restoring native Olympia oysters, and I'm interested in how they're interacting with non-native species. Did I hit my prompts? Very good.
Nicole, maybe call on people.
Yeah, Dr. Garza, you're up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm Corey Garza. I'm a professor in the Department of Marine Science at California State University, Monterey Bay. I specialize in an integration of marine and landscape ecology. So I use things like drones, GIS, ROVs to map marine habitats. We use a lot of spatial statistics in our group. And then I also just, related to this, I direct the Ocean Science REU program here at Cal State Monterey.
Okay, Dr. Smith.
I'm Dr. Jennifer Smith. I am a professor here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is part of the University of California, San Diego. I know many of you because I'm working with the REU that we are hosting here at Scripps, so nice to see all of you. And for those that I haven't met, nice to meet you as well. I have, for the most part of my career, been a coral reef ecologist, so studying how various human impacts affect the structure and functioning of coral reefs from really around the world, but focusing a lot in the Hawaiian Islands. My PhD, however, is in marine botany, and that has expanded my recent research to focusing more on some of California's amazing marine ecosystems, working both in the intertidal and in the kelp forests. And my most exciting current project is trying to figure out how to commercialize a specific type of seaweed that has been shown to essentially prevent livestock from producing methane, which would be a very big climate change solution. So
cool. All right, last but not least, Dr. Padilla, I think you're on mute.
Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Jacqueline Padilla Gamillo. I'm an assistant professor at University of Washington at the School of Aquatic and Fishery Science. I study ecology and physiology of invertebrates and seaweeds. I specialize on coral reproduction, mostly in Hawaii, but in Puget Sound, in the Seattle area, I am focusing a lot on shellfish in the context of climate change and ocean acidification. And one of my new research areas is also microplastics and understanding how climate change and microplastics actually may affect how organisms function. So yeah.
Great. So Dr. Zackerl, it's back to you. If you'd like to share, what are the things that you look for as you review graduate student applications?
Sure. I would say first and foremost, the most important thing for a student who's interested in joining a research lab is to show preparedness. So show that you've done the research on the lab that you're applying toward. Make sure that you know what kind of research they do and that you can speak to that research and why you're interested in that specifically, why you think you're a good match. So preparedness is really huge for me. And secondly, maybe is just fit with the lab in terms of research interests, in terms of what they hope to get out of grad school, and personality as well. Yeah, so those two things, preparedness and fitness. But I would just like to say something, if you don't mind me adding, that there's a huge element of serendipity that goes into applying to grad school. And I kind of wanted to say that to all of the prospective students as a comment of hope, because you're going to contact a lot of potential advisors, and some may not even respond to your email inquiries. And of those who do, many of them are not going to be looking for a graduate student to join their lab that year, or they don't have the funding to support you. And so you have to really be willing to open yourself up and put yourself out there, because part of it is just serendipity. You hit on somebody who's doing the work you want to do, and they've got an opening, and they've got some funding for you. And that's a bit of the puzzle. And so as much flexibility as you can have in terms of keeping your mind open in the beginning stages, right? And then also, do you have to start that particular semester? Do you have to start that particular year? Those are things that may impact response from prospective mentors for you. So throwing out serendipity as something for you to keep in mind.
Thank you, Dr. Zackerl. What about you, Dr. Garza? What's your take on admitting students?
Yeah, it's similar to what Danielle does. So, the first thing I look at is, have you looked at what my lab does? Do you actually understand what we do? Because I get a lot of inquiries every year just because we're here in Monterey Bay, and it is surprising. I actually do get quite a few inquiries where students want to work on sharks or coral reefs or marine mammals, and I work on the least charismatic things ever. I think a lobster is the most charismatic thing I work on. I think I work on things that are attached to rocks and don't move. So if that's what you want to work on, you're not going to be very excited being in my lab. So that's the first one. Have you actually done the homework on what it is we do in my lab? And then I also look at, I mentioned that we work with drones and GIS. I actually look at your skill sets. Do you have the skill sets that will let you be successful? Along the lines, the shark analogy, I get a lot of emails that start off with, I'm a certified scuba diver. And the reality is that's maybe number 50 on the list of things I'm actually looking for. And I think you'll find with a lot of potential mentors, that's not at the top of their list necessarily, that you're a scuba diver or that you've got some certification. Because the reality is I can hire divers who actually need them for a project. A couple of our projects, yeah, we do need diving on occasion, and some of my graduate students can do that. But if we need divers, I just hire them. Because a lot of what we do is based on robotics and technology, and then a lot of statistics and quantitative work a little bit later on. And so that's kind of what I look for. Do you know what we do, and you have some of the basic underlying skill sets, that we use in the lab. And just if I add on one last thing, it's also in your personal statement do you have a sense of what you want to do after you get your degree? Because one thing in my lab is, you might get in my lab, it might be fun to go to Canada or all the places we go to, but are you actually going to get the training that you need for the actual career that you envision yourself having afterwards? And that's really important for me to look at, because what I don't want someone to do is come into my lab and then be trained for a job that they actually don't want to have later on. And so I also I look at that type of thing as part of the application process.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, yeah, you're ready.
Yeah, I agree with what both of the previous speakers mentioned. With regard to preparation and doing your research on the lab that you're hoping to apply to, it seems like a lot of undergraduates don't get a lot of good advice on how to apply to graduate school, in my experience. A lot of students think it's just applying to school and you just submit your application and you wait and hear back from people. But in all reality, especially if you're applying to a PhD program, you're applying to a lab, you're applying to a faculty member to advise and mentor and supervise you for 5 years. And so this is a really big commitment for both the student and the faculty member. And so for me, I really like to have students make a personal connection with me, reach out. Sure, I do get a lot of email requests from students, and the ones that are more, that provide more information and that have shown me, or that can show me that they've done the research on my lab, and they don't just want to save coral reefs, and they don't just want to, solve whatever, climate change, but they actually have read some papers. They haven't just learned about my lab from my website. Maybe that's where they first found it, but then, to probe a little bit deeper and to actually, give examples of things that they're interested in. I don't necessarily require students to come in knowing what they want to do, but to have some ideas that are, reflective of their knowledge of the literature. So for me, it is, making a personal connection. I honestly don't even really have the time to look at applications that haven't reached out to me beforehand. So when it comes to admissions, like, those just get filtered out. So really try to make an effort, and, if you're local, try to make an appointment. Although now with COVID, just, try to set up a Zoom meeting and try to actually develop a personal relationship with the people you're interested in working with. Other than that, having experience. So, you guys having this REU experience is a great thing for your CV. For someone like me, actually, scuba experience is important because most of the work we do is underwater and it requires a lot of technical skill. But that's just me personally. So yeah, I would say the most important thing is to take this seriously and to try to imagine that you're asking someone to be your academic parent for 5 years, and you want to make sure that you find a good match to be that parent.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Jen and Corey and Danielle. For me, I have 3 main things. The first one is I'm really interested in knowing what you did before, right? What research experience you had, because that gives me an idea of your interest, or the fact that you work a long period in a specific lab or in a specific idea or topic. That's interesting to me, and it does not necessarily need to match with what I do, but just knowing, right, what you did before kind of gives me an idea of what you like, what your passion is. I really like nice written emails, right? That I know that you really think about it, about what you want to say. Writing is extremely important in grad school and in academia. So, it's something that you should take very seriously because you're going to be writing a bunch. And then I think the most important one to me is I really want to see motivated students, right? That have a lot of enthusiasm. Grad school is a long process. Things will go wrong for sure, right? And so having positive people is just very important because that just makes everything way more fun. So it doesn't matter if you're super smart, if you're in the field with everything going bad, the last thing I want is a student that is not able to adapt, go with the flow, and then try to create, start thinking creatively to see, okay, this is not working. What else can we do, right? That's just so much more fun. And so I think that's really, really important. I also like emails that say, not only your interest or what you want to go in my lab, but that tell me what type of sources of funding are you looking into? Right? Because that tells me a lot that you have gone even deeper than other people, that you have looked at other ways to support. Like right now, I might or might not have funding for some specific projects. So receiving an email from a student that is telling me, you know, I really want to contribute with, you know, this type of funding, you know, that's so great, right? Because then we can explore different options, and then you can maybe extend longer or have more money for your research. And then it's just more relaxing, rather than you having to, and me having to look like every quarter or every semester for funding for the research and your salary and things like that, which are important, which is a little bit related to what Danielle was saying, right? So it's about many things, but it's about the match, but also the fact that, you know, the people who you match with have sources, or that you have sources to support your ideas and your research.
Great. I think it's so interesting how from not one of our faculty panelists did we hear that they're looking at your GRE score or your GPA as the first things. And I think for students, that's what you stress about the most, only to find out later that maybe that wasn't the reason you were or were not picked. Faculty, and we don't have to keep going in order. I just wanted to make sure everyone got a chance to be heard at first. But so a lot of you talked about how you usually receive first contact with students by email. So could any of you elaborate on the timing of that? You know, what do you expect or hope to see content-wise in the email? So you've already talked about showing interest, enthusiasm, maybe ideas about funding, but, you know, should students include a CV? Do you expect to see that? How long should the email be? Obviously, it should be free of spelling and grammar errors, but there's a lot more wiggle room in there. So if you guys have thoughts, we'd love to hear it.
I will. I have thoughts. And so in the chat, when Jackie was talking about that introductory email and how writing is important, I started to put into the chat some things about making sure that you have a trusted mentor or a teacher help you outline what should be in your introductory email. Because you want to convey a lot of things in that email. You want to convey enthusiasm. You want to convey how much you've done your homework. You want to convey your level of experience and why you find me interesting and my research interesting, what you hope to do with your career, right? So typically I would say it's going to be a multi-paragraph email, and that is going to have some of those elements that I just, you know, mentioned there. But in addition, you just need to know whether that particular graduate advisor is hoping to recruit a new student, right? Because it's important to make that introductory email a few paragraphs, but you can recycle that email over and over again to different advisors, right? But really, you're not going to follow up with more information necessarily until you know that they are actually looking to take somebody into their lab. And so that's a really critical question to ask. Should they include a CV? A lot of students do. I think if something about their email piques my interest and I am accepting grad students, then I usually reply with send me your CV and let's set up a time to talk, you know. So I don't think it's necessary, but maybe some of the other faculty really do like to see that CV attached right in the very beginning. So it'd be good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I can go. Yeah, you know, like in terms of length, yeah, a paragraph or two is fine. Like, it doesn't have to be, you know, an honors thesis when you email it. You know, just because the reality is that we're all reading a lot of emails every day, so the more concise and to the point, you know, the better. And in general, you know, if a student, what I would prefer, at least what are good emails for me, is when a student asks, or, you know, I'm interested in graduate school, writing to see if you're interested in the lab. You know, I noticed you work with drones and ROVs and technology. I have an interest in that. You know, so in other words, making that connection, like why you're, you know, getting right to the point, like why you're interested sort of in my particular lab, you know, and then, you know, a lot of times students will attach a CV, that's great. But, you know, they might follow up with, usually close, you know, if you have time, would you be willing to chat with me? That type of email is great. And it's really short and covers everything. The ones where, you know, a potential advisor has trouble with is like, I do get a lot of emails that are just, are you taking grad students this year? Right, and in those cases, you know, I wind up having to extract out of the student what it is they really want, and in some cases, then you realize they're kind of just fishing for a potential opening somewhere, and so you don't want to have a potential advisor pull out of you what your actual interest is. So yeah, just a really short thing about asking, are you taking students? You know, I have interests that align with yours. You know, I want to do this later on. And are you willing to, do you have time to chat about, you know, potentially applying? That's perfect. And then if you want to add on a CV, that's great. And if someone's really interested in your email, like Danielle mentioned, they might follow up saying, hey, can you send a copy of your CV? I'd be interested to take a look at that. That's totally fine.
Yeah, for me, I kind of like the hybrid. I don't like the super long emails, but the really short, brief ones that don't provide any content and just, you know, ask me what my lab does and that they're interested in grad school. You know, those are turnoffs. So I like a couple of paragraphs that are concise but catchy, and you know, you want to grab the attention of the person that you're contacting. And I do like to see a CV because that will, if I get pulled in and I'm interested in learning more, then I'll go right to the CV. And if that looks compelling, then I'll respond to the student or put it in a folder for later. I also think reaching out as soon as possible is good, because we often get really flooded with emails as admissions, as the deadlines start closing, and then it gets to be super overwhelming. So for me, the students that are reaching out even now in the summer or even in the spring, honestly, those are the people that I end up being able to develop more of a relationship with. And so when opportunities or funding might come available, those are the people I think about. Oh, maybe this would be a good fit for the student that emailed me, you know, a couple months ago. And so the sooner you can kind of get in there with developing the relationship, the better off you will be. And I'll just mention briefly too, with regard to GREs and GPAs and whatnot. I mean, I think a lot of schools are moving away from using the GREs altogether. So this year, we're not considering the GREs this year. And I think that's going to be continued, or that's going to continue in the future. And for me, GPA, I will look at, but honestly, you know, for me, research experience can trump GPA in some cases. So if you have, you know, you've had a couple bad grades and then pulled your GPA down, but you have some great research experience and you have a really good letter of recommendation, especially from someone that is in the field, that to me can carry a lot of weight. So, you know, don't get down on yourself if, you know, you have bad GRE scores. They're not being used this year. And again, the more research experience you can get, real world experience, I think that can help override potentially low GPA.
Yeah. So for me, so GPA is not essential, but it definitely tells me that if you have a good GPA, you have discipline and you work hard, right? For sure, at minimum. And so when I had to decide between two candidates, if they are like the same, but obviously someone has shown consistency, right, through their undergrad. I mean, I give value for sure, but it's not everything. But I think you still should consider, because in order for you to compete for fellowships, they might take that into account more than we do, right? So they're still important. The GRE, oh my God, I think should not exist at all. And also my department is moving away from it. But that's also another way how they can rank the students, some institutions, and give or not fellowships. So as long as that's there, you know, it's still worth making all your efforts to still get good scores to increase your chances of getting maybe funds or other opportunities. But that will not matter for me, right? I don't care what your GRE is. In terms of emails and how to reach, I got like the most perfect email on July 16. I still remember this student, right? So, okay. And I even put it in a special folder because it's like, oh my gosh, this is like the best email ever. So the first the subject, right? His name, and very clear, right? Prospective graduate student, very interested in joining your lab, very with capital letters. I'm like, oh, wow. You know, he's into it from the subject. And then he says hello, who he is, what he wants to do, And you can tell that he has already looked at the website of my department. Then on bold format says why I want to work in your lab. And then he writes like 3 lines. And I'm like, oh wow. So he helps me to identify exactly what I want to know, right? And then the next paragraph is again bold, my past research experience, bang, another 3 or 4 lines. And then another that says my research interest, ideas, bang, right? So super effective. Why he wants to work specifically with me? Well, no, first who he is, why does he want to work with me? What has he done? And what are his ideas? And his ideas are deep. And he gives me 2 or 3. I'm like, oh, wow, this is good. And then next at the end, references. So it's medium, a little bit medium to large, but he gives me everything I need. And he attaches 1 PDF with CV. And he happens to also have a website, and he just puts the link of his website so I can access to his website. I mean, again, this is like perfection, right? But, but you get a lot of them. So now I remember this person, and, even if he doesn't end up coming to my lab or not, for whatever, I will remember him. And if I see him in a conference, I'm going to be like, hey, I really like your email, right? And that's how, relationships develop regardless. And so this is great. And only send 1 PDF. Right? Don't send a lot of documents. We have so many documents, electronic files. If you're gonna send something, just send in one file, because I tend to lose things. To keep track of so many things, so many students. So yeah, this was a really good email.
Hi, Blake. Yes, please ask a follow-up question.
Okay. Jen, I had a question for you. You had mentioned about having like a letter of rec from someone who's in the field. How important is it to you that letter of rec is from someone in the field, or would you prefer that it says really positive things? And what are the things that you would hope those letters say?
Sorry, that's a really good question. I think that the letters of recommendation are super important. And if you have a letter from somebody who has experience with working with you in a research setting, that can give us a better sense of your independence and your ability to work in teams and, those kinds of things. And I realize that that's, of course, going to be limited to people that actually get the opportunity to have independent research experience. I guess what I meant by in the field was more thinking along the lines of like, if you really wanted to study coral reef ecology, if you have some experience working on some aspect of that, having a letter of recommendation from somebody who can speak to your experience in that field is certainly helpful. But of course, I know that those opportunities are often hard to come by, but yeah, that's what I meant by in the field. So in the field that's relevant to the field that you're hoping to go into for your graduate work. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from students? Please just speak up.
Yeah, so I did have one question kind of about contacting prospective professors. So one thing I've seen online is that some professors request that prospective students send a writing sample when they first contact. Is that something you all look for, or do you not necessarily need that as something that students send to you?
For me, not at the beginning, maybe later,
Mm-hmm.
as we move in our conversations, maybe. But that's also part of what I'm gonna see in your application, at least for my department, right? So I can't wait until I get the package to really assess that. Mm-hmm.
We can infer a lot from your introductory email as well.
Yeah.
That's why it's super important for you
Yeah.
to, just like you would with any paper that you're turning into a college level course, you want to proofread it. And if your writing skills are not really strong, then you want to help yourself as you would in a class that you're taking, by taking advantage of the resources that are around. So show you're resourceful and that you you go seek the aid of a trusted advisor or of a writing center advisor who can help you really shine up that introductory email, right? So we can get a lot from the introductory email.
I mean, the other thing I do, I don't normally request like a writing sample, but getting back to the transcripts, one thing I do is if I look at the transcripts, I look at certain courses you may or may not have taken, and I'll often look to see if you've taken a technical writing or a scientific writing course as part of your training, because it gives me some sense of where you're coming into a graduate program in terms of your writing. Because I've had a number of students who come in without that, and they do very literature-based writing. There's a lot of prose that's wrote into it. It's very long. And so you have to sort of undo some of that as part of their graduate training. And so it gives me a sense of where they're coming in terms of their writing style in this case. And that's really the only time, and I'll even ask about it during an interview. Hey, have you taken a technical writing course at any point in your background? And yeah, it's about half and half. Usually about half the students have and half haven't. So, and so that's probably the only time I really address writing.
If I may, students, I know that you guys are seniors primarily, and you might be thinking, oh shoot, I missed my chance to take a scientific writing course, but I'd like to plug that various schools online like Coursera do offer free scientific writing classes. So you could look into that. I know there's one done by a professor from Stanford, but I think it just closed. But you know, there are other ways that you can get access to resources and to learning opportunities than just what's offered at your university.
I was just going to mention too that one way to potentially impress your future advisor is if you're applying to graduate fellowships like the NSF GRFP. If you have a draft of your proposal and you're still working on it, those aren't due till December. If you want to share that with your the person that you're in touch with about graduate school, that can sometimes be well, it's certainly informative from the perspective that you've thought about a scientific question, you've put it into an articulated 2-page format, and it may not be complete or polished, but at least to me, that always shows me that the students are taking the initiative, that they know about these opportunities. It's certainly a lot easier for all of us, I'm sure, to take students that come in with their own fellowships, such as the NSF GRFP or other fellowships that might be available. And so, like, if you're interested in sharing a writing sample, something like that could be actually really productive in terms of helping you get into graduate school, I view as being beneficial. So.
All right, thank you.
So I'm just reading from the student questions that were submitted ahead of time, some of which you've already touched on in part, but I'll read the top 2 for you guys to speak on. And it's, what do you look for in regards to expectations on communication, work ethic, program knowledge, etc. in an incoming graduate student? So right, you guys have already alluded, some of that you'll get in that introductory email and follow-up conversations. And then the second, tied for first, what qualities in a potential grad student would turn you off from wanting to mentor them, accept them into your program? So what are the do's and don'ts?
I mean, I'll go. I think, at least for me, when a student will usually ask me what my mentoring style's like, and I'll kind of explain it to them, what I usually tell them is that I'm hands off, but what that doesn't mean is that when you show up, you'll never see me again, because I've seen some labs like that in the past where there are so many students, you rarely see the advisor. What it means is that I'm not down in the lab every day seeing what you're doing or calling you up and saying, why aren't you in the lab at 8 a.m.? I noticed you weren't there. So that's not me and as advisor. And so normally, what I tell my students is, we'll meet about once a month to see how things are going. But really what I anticipate is that if I don't hear from you in between those times, I'm assuming things are going okay, or you're figuring things out, right? And so that gets to some level of independence in this case. And so, while I'm there to help out, I'm not necessarily going to be dragging you the entire way to your degree. And so, students got to understand that when they're coming into my lab, that's going to be part of the deal, is that, they'll really expect it to have some level of independence. And for some of my students, the shock is that sometimes they work on the weekends because I can't control the tides. And so the tides go out when they go out and they come in when they come in. And so if you're expecting it to be 9 to 5, it's not going to, you're going to be in for a rude shock. And yeah, there'll be some days we're going to be out on Friday nights, like out in the intertidal, or you're going to be diving off of a boat and it's going to be really cold. It's not like Discovery Channel. We don't come in when the sun goes down and go have, a nice dinner afterwards. It's like there's some hard work, that's in play. And so you got to, at least for my lab and some of the work we do, you got to be mentally prepared for that. And so, yeah, some level of independence and understanding that you're not always necessarily going to have a standard 9 to 5, 5-day a week sort of operation when you're in graduate school. And those are kind of the key things, I think, at least for my lab and in general, I think for some graduate programs.
So I'll just follow up and say that, Corey, that made me think about another really important aspect of doing your research for graduate school, and that is, it's not just important to meet the mentor, but it's really important to talk to the students in the lab about the mentor, to ask what is their mentoring style like, how well have you worked with this person, and also about the research. What is your lifestyle like? How have you made it work in Southern California? It's really expensive to live here. So I always tell my prospective students, please contact my grad students and ask how they survive. How do they make enough money to make it through this program? That's a really important component of your experience as well. And then as far as what I look for in qualities of a student, if a student is reliable and hardworking, that makes up for an awful lot. So what I don't want to hear is that they're unreliable or a fair weather student. And typically typically I'm not going to hear those kinds of things because usually people are pretty smart about who they ask to write letters, right, for them. And so, but a advisor who's writing a letter for you will not say you're hardworking and reliable unless you are. So I really like to see those words in a letter of recommendation. I think those are important words to hear.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things. When you go to graduate school, especially if you're doing a PhD, you're basically committing your life to the next 5 years to this topic that you've chosen to study for your PhD. And so this topic needs to be something that you are like innately passionate about and that you want to stay up nights thinking about, that you want to come in early to work on, that you are, just driven to pursue these questions. And if you can find something like that, it's great, right? Because that's like, it's what drives you. It's where your passion is. And you are like, you just want to do the science all the time. And so for me, finding students that I can kind of see that passion and that drive and that like innate curiosity to be a scientist, to ask questions, to not just follow the books and not just do A and B and then, quickly go home or whatever. It's the students that are, that have this innate scientific passion and drive. And a lot of it also has to do with creativity. I mean, we do research, and research is not a cookbook kind of science. It's something that you have to be adaptive. You have to innovate. You have to solve problems. You have to not be afraid of power tools. You have to be able to go outside at all times of day. You have to, in the field of marine science, at least for us, so for me, being able to see that you've had like real world experience, having some amount of travel, whether it's local or national or international, but just, so I think a lot of it is being able to be creative, innovative, passionate, driven. These are all things that are characteristics of successful future graduate students. And so anything that's not that, to me, is a turnoff. If you see students that are just doing the minimum to get by, that's not going to make a successful graduate student. I think I had something else, but I forgot. So I'll end.
Yeah, so for me, once some students have been selected, they come to an event for prospective graduate students. And if you are in the top 10 of the department, top 10 candidates, we pay actually for you to come to Seattle So we can talk to you, and we have some events so that you can learn about the university. And so for those 2 days, that's when I really, really assess the students. We go out for lunch, and then we might go out for dinner with my other labs members. And to me, it's really important that you are able to connect at least a little bit, right, with the people that could potentially be your academic family for the next 2 or 3 or 5 years, depending if it's a master's or a PhD. So I think that's important. And sometimes it's tricky, right? Because you might be the nicest person, but if you are shy, it might be hard. So, you know, try, I mean, don't fake it, but, you know, really do try to make an effort, because I think that's really important to learn how to do it, even if you're afraid. So I think what I really appreciate is someone that has courage, like courage to do things that maybe, like sometimes in science, you don't know what to do. And sometimes you're like, should I try this technique or this other thing? And it's about having courage to learn, right? You might think, why do you need courage to learn? But in science, you really need courage sometimes, because it's like, okay, I have to go completely the other way. Can I really do this? I've never done it. And so you really need that courage. And I really like that, people with courage and that are hungry for change, right? Maybe it sounds like a movie star or I don't know, but I really want people that I also want to do something to apply it to something or to improve something, right? That's really important. I really like people that are flexible, right? Sometimes some students come to you, you interview them, you're great, but they only want to do this thing. And then you're like, well, what about, you know, we might not be able to do this, or you might already be doing that. So you cannot do that again, but they are still stuck to the idea. And that's really difficult. So as soon as I see something like that, I just say, okay, thank you, bye, right? I really need people to be flexible. And that doesn't mean that we won't do exactly what your interests are, but, you know, maybe there are other ways to get to that, or maybe at another point, or that might just be part of something greater. And so that's why I need people to be open. And then the other one, I really want people to be very respectful, right? So important, so important. We still, like, I've seen racism at all levels, right? From, so I'm, right, as a Latina faculty, and the first Latina ever hired in the 99 years of my department, right? Like, I constantly receive microaggressions, and they come from all kinds of sources, right? Above and below me, in terms of academic, right? And so the last thing I want is a student that is not conscious about diversity and that does not have respect and compassion, right? So, and that's just more important than ever. So I think that's, yeah. If, again, I see a little hint of someone that is just not aware, because it might not be a bad person, but is not aware, again, yeah, you're out for sure.
Yeah, Richard, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Jackie, thank you. But I want to change the topic, and what you said is very important, okay? Extremely important. I want to change the topic though. I've got 4 of you guys here. What is COVID and the closures and the restrictions of the university doing to application processes and considerations? Can you guys reflect briefly on that? Because this is a cohort of people we have who's doing their best to continue their career. Thank you.
I think a word that came up just a little while ago, which was flexible. I think that's what we're all, we all need to be flexible this year. Things are different. And more now than ever, we need to make sure that this cohort of students doesn't get left behind, and we need to do everything we can to push them forward, to give them opportunities. I mean, I think that's exactly what this REU is all about, right? Is not just throwing our hands up in the air and saying, well, I guess this year's a wash. No, we all have come together to try to find ways of giving these students an opportunity, and we need to carry that on through this coming academic year. I know in some ways things are going to be a little bit easier. We can interview as many students as we want because we're doing it all on Zoom rather than having those in-person interviews that Jackie mentioned a minute ago. Hopefully there will be some flexibility with funding, which will allow us to maybe bring in a few more students than we normally would. But I think that's, for me, that's the biggest thing is thinking about being flexible and providing opportunity and not leaving this cohort behind.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, at least here, we run the RE program here. And, we're not running it in person, but we're doing professional development online. And one of the conversations we've had with the students, it's a lot of them are, there's a tendency, and I see it on my campus too, because we're a smaller program. There's this telephone game that plays out across our undergraduates here. One of them here is that if they don't do this thing, then it's all over, and then that just takes off, just throughout that whole cohort, right? And so we're constantly having to, combat that. And, at least with a lot of the students we worked with, the telephone game they had is because they couldn't do an in-person REU this summer. That was it. Their career was over. No one's going to look at them. And so, the conversation we've had to have with them, it's these professional development skills. These are as important as the other skills you would have picked up, in an in-person REU. And I think that's been an important one for them, and at least for our programs, because I'm split between two programs here in Monterey: our main on-campus program, and then the program out at Moss Landing Marine Lab. With the faculty, it's needing to take a more holistic approach, to looking at applications, because there is that tendency, oh, does this kid do stable isotopes? Oh, then that's the one, they won't look at anything else. There, you're gonna need to look at the bigger picture, at this point. What's the totality of what they're bringing to your lab? And it's kind of, we sometimes forget too, because I had this conversation a few weeks ago on a webinar I was on with our Cal State system, is we're actually educators. I mean, it's technically part of it's actually our job. We sometimes forget that you're professors at a university. By default, you're an educator. And so, part of training graduate students is education. And so, yeah, there's likely going to be some skill sets that we need to devote time to developing, in our students. Like if I imagine if I bring in students next year, yeah, maybe a student was going to do an in-person drone class or whatever it was, I'm probably going to have to pick up, that slack some way, in terms of in the teaching, and sort of help develop that skill. And so I imagine that's where a number of programs are going. I don't know that all of them are going, but at least here in our area, these are conversations we're starting to have.
I would just say that I don't really think that the COVID crisis has impacted my graduate program as much as it has, unfortunately, my undergrads. And that's because at the Cal State system right now, at least at our university, we're not allowed to operate at full capacity. So I can only give a certain percentage of my students access to the lab. Now, luckily, because I'm a field ecologist, it turns out that it's fairly okay to be outside. And especially if you're distanced and there's a nice breeze blowing and you're on the coast in a remote location where there aren't a lot of people. So, so I've really pushed my undergraduates to move to, if they weren't already, to move to more field intensive kinds of projects. And I'm trying to, and I'm trying to just keep calm and carry on with my grad program and with my funding and everything. It doesn't seem like the funders have yet kind of shut down or postponed really. And so I'm having, about the same success rate in terms of gaining funding. So that means I'm having about the same success rate in terms of accepting grad students in, and that's great news for you all. But really unfortunately, it's those in-person undergrad experiences that at this moment in my lab are really difficult to pull off. Yeah.
And just to follow up with that, I'll say from the NSF perspective that within the agency, as just one example of a funding agency, that there's a real commitment to not just maintaining the programs that we have, but making them work in a new way and making sure that all of the cracks that were already there in the way that we fund and support students that are getting exacerbated by the pandemic and other factors are able to be addressed holistically and responsibly too, moving forward.
Yeah, for us, COVID did not, I mean, it definitely impacted our ability to work in the lab and in the new aquatic facility that we are building, which is sad. And so what I did with my grad students is, at least for a couple of them that were just getting started, I told them, well, this is your time to write a review paper. So we've been using that time that they won't be, that was supposed for them to start, you know, playing with the equipment and installing things. Now they just did a very deep literature review, and one of them is almost ready to be submitted, which is kind of crazy. It's a mini review, it's not huge, but it was kind of, it's an interesting topic. So that was very productive. And in terms of the undergrads, I mean, just what I did is I took I was not teaching, but I took a teaching technology class at UW, and now I have some more skills to try to do things more synchronous, asynchronous, and hopefully that will, you know, make my online classes better. Yeah, but I guess, yeah, same thing with undergrads. It's just tough, and we'll just have to catch up and get better at online training. Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, thanks you guys. Richard, did that answer your question, or did you have anything to add?
Oh, I got a lot of answers. I really appreciated the different perspectives people brought. I would say from the point of view of the University of Oregon, we don't know what our recruiting class will be like yet for people applying this coming year, because we don't know what the budget will be and what the TA-ships will be and so forth. But it's good to hear that people are still, you know, that much of the funding agencies are still going, and, you know, and everybody's trying to do what they can under the circumstances. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, so we only have about 5 minutes before we're gonna let these faculty go. So students, if you have any remaining burning questions, now's your chance.
So I have a question about gap years, and I guess this has become a little bit more relevant with the whole COVID situation. Did any of the faculty take a gap year or have any thoughts about it? Or maybe ideas of like what you would suggest students apply for, anything like that?
I took 5 gap years. So after grad, I decided I wasn't quite ready for grad school. I wasn't ready for that commitment. So I went and just got a job actually as a high school teacher. And I thought it was just kind of a little fling, and it turned into a fairly deep commitment to education. So I stuck with it for a while until I felt like I needed to be more of a scientist to be a good biology teacher. And so that's when I decided to go back to grad school. So yeah, so my 5 gap years, I think they helped me in incredible ways. I grew a lot as a person. I was more financially stable. I was more mature. And I was then, I had a lot of drive going back to grad school. I really wanted to be there, and I knew why I wanted to be there. So gap year, highly recommended.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't take one. Actually, Danielle and I went to the same program. We started the same year in the same cohort. I went straight in out of undergraduate, but at that point at Santa Barbara, I think that was an unusual thing, because in fact, my office mates were like 35 and 40. So I think it was not, back then it wasn't unusual for people to take a number of years off. And so I think it's still the case. I think you usually have it's kind of a mid-20s-ish cohort, I think, coming in. And so, but I will be honest, I was pretty burned out after my first year. So I graduated from Cal State LA, and then worked as a research assistant for a guy named Carlos Robles for a summer in between. And then we went right to Santa Barbara, and then, you know, I got thrown into a pretty intense lab, as Danielle knows. I was in a pretty intense fish lab, and yeah, I was pretty burned out by the end. And so yeah, at the end I was like, wow, that would have been a good idea. But it can work for some people and it don't. You know, my only advice, because I do get this question a lot, is, you know, if you take a gap year, you know, try to think about, is there something you can do during the year to engage in what you want to do later on? because I also have seen people take gap years and they get involved in something else, and it's really hard to come back. It's kind of like if you stop running and then you try to get back into it, you have to work out all the kinks again. And so, and so if you can kind of keep some momentum going, it makes that gap year a little easier to come back from.
I also did not take a gap year. I went straight through, pretty much been in school or at school my entire life, which in retrospect, actually, I am fine with. I have always been super passionate about science. So for me, it was a fun experience and a fun journey. But that being said, I think for individuals, it really comes down to, like, are you sure you want to go to graduate school? And if you're sure you want to go to graduate school and you feel like you've got a pretty compelling application package, then go ahead and apply, and you're ready and you've motivated and you don't want to lose momentum. If you're not 100% sure, or you think you could use that year to gain a little bit more experience to make your application package a little bit more competitive, or to dabble around in some different areas to try to convince yourself that you are sure that you want to go to graduate school, I think that the gap year or years can be super valuable. I think it just really comes down to the individual. I do find value in, for me, I started as a master's student, and then my master's project exploded, and so I just transitioned into a PhD program. So I didn't know straight out that I wanted to do a PhD. But I see a lot of students that do feel like they know they want to do a PhD. So if you're one of those, then in some ways, why waste time? Might as well stay on course. But I do find value in students that have taken time, that end up potentially having a little bit more experience, that are a little bit older. So, I definitely see gap years as a positive thing. And or if you go in to do a master's degree before you do your PhD, if you're thinking about doing a PhD, I think that's also super valuable, because it gives you the opportunity to work in another lab for a couple of years. It also gives you kind of an ability to test the waters, to ensure for yourself that you want to do another 5 years of graduate school. So I'm super supportive of people doing master's degrees as kind of a way to test the waters and do a mini PhD or thesis, which allows you to see what it's all about before committing 5 years of your life to it.
Yeah. I took a year gap between my undergraduate and my master's program, and then another year between my master's and PhD. And it was quite nice. I was a technician the first time for John Bruno at University of North Carolina, so I did a lot of ecology. It was really fun. We went to a lot of places, and so it was really, really nice to be a tech for a year. And then the other time I took a gap, I just returned to Mexico. I was very tired of English. And, my master's was really hard because I also had to learn English at the same time, kind of. So I was really exhausted. And so I went back to Mexico, made candles for a little bit. And then I'm like, no, I think I really like this. And so I did then my PhD at the University of Hawaii.
If we have some time, I kind of wanted to ask another question. Is that all right? Yeah.
Let's call it the last one.
Okay. Some of you mentioned students sending you their websites, and I was just wondering, what are some things that you've seen on these websites that you really liked? Is there anything that we should avoid when making professional websites, or yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on those?
I think that's very, very supplementary, right? So focus on the email and focus on the CV, for sure. If you have extra time, sure, do a website, right? But don't give it the same priority. Okay, so what I like about his website was that he had, I could tell that he liked what he was doing, right? He put a little bit of the research he did, some nice photos, he also does photography. So I like to see that other aspect, that he's just not like science, but that he has other hobbies and he's good at it. And then, I don't know, it was just well explained science to the public, but good data, and yeah, it was very simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think websites are nice to showcase things that you can't necessarily convey in words in a CV or in an email. So it's more like, it's not just reiterating your CV on your website, but it's showing some additional skill sets that you may have with technology or digital media or whatever it may be, showcasing your ability to communicate things that you're passionate about. So think of it as like a kind of a flashy bells and whistles thing where you can share something about yourself to give us a sense of kind of who you are as a person outside of this very formal kind of CV and letter. So it's like kind of giving us a sense, a flavor for who you are as an individual. That's why I like websites.
Although I will say I'm a little old-fashioned. Maybe it's because I have a 15-year-old daughter who's just starting to build her web presence, but I don't really want to know about your parties necessarily. Or maybe, I don't know if you want to take a really strong, like, well, you certainly don't want to be disrespectful either. So, but I like creativity. I like an artistic eye. I like, education outreachy kind of things. So like Jennifer mentioned, it is an opportunity to show us a different dimension that might not come out as strongly in other stuff, but you definitely want to be careful about if you're going to share your presence, and you want to be a little bit careful about what you show, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna say for me too, I haven't gotten many websites to me, but we hire other graduate students in the program because I run a NOAA center, the West Coast arm of a NOAA center here at CSUMB, and part of that we have a pretty heavy social media presence, and so one of the things that we do is we actually hire part-time or on a semester basis graduate student assistants to manage some of our communication through social media, and so we look for some of that savvy because when I got to Monterey, like there was a big aversion to even having websites. But then like social media was a bridge too far, like for some of our faculty, it was like, oh, no, we can't do that. But the reality is, when we launched our RU site, that's how we got most of our applicants, was through our social media presence. They weren't going to the website, they were going to our Facebook page or our Twitter page and then retweeting it and sharing it. And so kind of thinking about new ways to communicate. And that's something that we do. And the other thing is, I work with a lot of underrepresented groups in ocean science, and that's a main way to get through to them. And so we actually are in the midst of hiring a translator to convert a lot of our web pages and social media to Spanish language so that we can hit multiple audiences as well. And so having somebody who's savvy in how to do that, that's really useful for us because the reality is we're in a new way of trying to communicate our science, not just to like the other 10 other people in the world, right, who work on the exact same thing I work, but we have to sort of communicate out to this sort of broader social net that's out there in terms of who we want to engage, in the fields that we're working in. And so that component, if you can bring that to the table and kind of highlight how it's not just this thing you do, but it's going to elevate stuff that lab is doing, that's a real strong sell.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I think it's that time. Hopefully you guys got some of your main questions answered. And if you could all maybe give silent claps as thank you to all the faculty who spoke with you today. Faculty, you are welcome to carry on with the rest of your day. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing your experience and knowledge. Students, you now have a 5-minute break, so please come back to us. Oh, I guess we're a little behind at maybe
4:10.
Okay.
If you guys can jump back on at 4:10, so it's 3 minutes. Quick break. Look away from the screen. Take a minute for yourself, and let us get organized. Thank you. Thanks
Rainey.
panelists.
Bye, guys.
Hello, Elaine. Nice to see you.
What's
Hello,
up?
Katie.
I haven't seen you forever.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Nice to meet you, Elaine.
Nice to meet
I'm
you, Nicole. Thanks for putting up with my emails.
Oh, you were so helpful. So not a bother at all.
Predictable.
Oh, and I see Katie. Okay, and Mary. Hi. And Emily. Yay, everyone's here. Great, great. Grad students, do you have any questions before we get started? The students are on a 3-minute break, but they'll be with us shortly.
Is this for all of the ocean sciences REU?
Cool. My name is Katie Holleran. Hi, thank you, Rennie. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Let's see, remind me if I forget an answer to something. But I'm a third-year student in chemical oceanography in the MIT HUI joint program. I work with Liz Kuczynski. We do environmental metabolomics. And let's see, what else do I need to say, Rennie? Did I catch it?
Why you chose this degree and where you're hoping it'll take you after.
Right.
If you know.
It's a tricky question. So the reason I chose this degree is because before this, I had a background in like evolutionary genomics and then also in synthetic organic chemistry, which are like two weird and wildly separate fields. And I wanted to find a way to combine the different things that I loved from both of them. And I felt like geosciences generally was a good place to do that. Let's see, going forward, tough to say. I could see myself staying in academia if academia wants to keep me around, but I'm not willing to, like, I don't know, sacrifice myself or my happiness to academia. So I can also see myself getting out and working for nonprofits or in like secondary education, something like that.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Next up, Mary.
I'm Mary. Most of you guys have spent copious amounts of time on Zoom with me. But for those of you who haven't, I will be starting my master's this fall at SIO, studying the spatial patterns of coral reef bleaching. And I took a kind of an interesting path. I thought I was going to take a gap year and apply to PhD programs and go straight into a PhD and then do research and be in academia for the rest of my life. And took that year working in the stand-in lab at Scripps, and I love research, but I could not see myself sitting and working in a lab for the rest of my life. So got into a bunch of PhD programs, had an existential crisis of, is this really what I want to commit the next 5 years to? Decided to take another gap year, and with the help of my mentors, realized that a master's is the next step for me. So I see myself working more in the NGO conservation side of things rather than in academia.
Excellent, thanks. Emily?
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Schlesinger. I think I recognize some of you that were in the Rutgers portion of the REU. I am, in the fall, I'll be starting my 5th year in my PhD program. I was going to graduate sooner and then the pandemic hit, so we'll see when that's over. My focus is on fisheries, fish physiology, and climate change. So basically using tools in physiology and reproductive biology to understand how the environment is affecting fish species, and then trying to relate that to various stock assessments and how we set various catch limits and stuff like that. I'm originally from California and had done a bunch of fisheries cruises through NOAA labs out in Santa Cruz. And I was actually helping out with a krill lab. And it was there that I realized the world of fisheries. And so that after undergrad, I decided to make a switch. So I can talk later about kind of making a mid, in between degrees, a big switch in sort of fields and how that kind of played out. What else am I missing?
What you have to hope to do after.
Oh yeah, yes. So I would actually, the more I've stayed in my PhD program, the more I'm certain I want to stay in academia. And the reasons being is that I really enjoy teaching and mentoring students and kind of being in the school atmosphere. And staying in academia allows me to do research, kind of plan things that I want to do, and also work with students for pretty much the rest of my life. So.
Awesome, thank you. Elaine.
Hey everyone, I'm Elaine. I am going into my third year as a PhD student. Like I mentioned before, I graduated from my undergrad, had a summer break, and then went straight into my PhD program. I can't tell you whether or not I regret that because I don't have another version of my life, but yeah, I know that I look very young. It's because I am. I'm at the University of Rhode Island. I'm getting my PhD in biological and environmental sciences, but my research specifically focuses on tropical marine biodiversity. So I do a lot of coral reef biodiversity research in Indonesia, where I'm sampling water for environmental DNA. And so, sorry, that's a car. So I'm using some genetic tools to infer marine biodiversity in the tropics is how I'd summarize my research. And in the future, I hope to get better windows and air conditioning so I don't have to open my windows. And also hopefully work in the NGO and conservation space as well. So like my dream job would be a staff scientist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. To this REU class, first of all, I was rejected from every REU I applied for, so it is a huge accomplishment for you guys to get into this program. I know that right now is time to be a student and even to think about graduate school, so you guys are doing great already. Honestly, as a result of getting rejected year after year from the REU program, and not having a faculty member as a research advisor, I actually had someone who was like on the track to becoming a tenured track professor. So she was just a teaching fellow. I had a teaching fellow as kind of my mentor, and what that meant was we would kind of try to scrounge opportunities for research at other institutions. So similar to some of you, I did a lot of photo quadrat data. I was just handed photos and just spent a lot of time on the computer because I didn't really have access to a marine ecosystem in my undergrad. And from that, I was like, man, this sucks. I don't want to like memorize what species look like for the rest of my life. It's a lot of work and a lot of rote memorization. And so I, through this very ambiguous process of networking, got to work on my senior thesis in Panama using environmental DNA. And I got into, sorry, this is really long. I'll be short here, but I applied, or I emailed like 17 different professors. 16 of them said no. And the one that I got into, which is the one that I'm currently in, works on more marine biodiversity using environmental DNA in Indonesia. And so that was kind of a perfect fit for me.
Thanks, Elaine. That's actually exactly what I wanted to ask you guys to speak on next was, how did you find your advisor, right? Because that was something that surprised me when I was applying. This isn't like applying to med school, to law school, right? You're applying to a person. You're asking to be their child where they take care of you and help you to get your degree. So if you could each in turn share with the students, if you don't mind, how you found the program, maybe how many places you applied to, did you get in the first time, that sort of stuff.
I don't know what order we want to keep answering things in. But so my background is not marine sciencey like at all. I grew up in the middle of the country. I like the ocean, but like the way people feel a spiritual connection to the ocean, for me, that's the mountains. So really I'm like far distant from this field if you go back not that far. The way I found my way here is by realizing that I wanted to combine these two things that seemed separate. And so I Googled evolution, organic chemistry, and I came up on to biogeochemists. And I told one of my undergrad mentors, a chemistry professor, that I thought biogeochemistry was what I was really interested in. And he said, oh, I know someone who's doing that at the University of Washington. And that was a woman in the oceanography department at Washington. And so she's the one that really told me like, yeah, here's what we do. It seems like your background's a good fit. And here are the other places to look at. So like, I had never heard of Scripps. I had never heard of Hui. I didn't know like what other places I could look at to do this. Yeah, that's really how I ended up here.
And if I can just jump onto that for a second for the REU students too, I think that's a valuable lesson in that the name, sort of the name brand schools that are considered the oceanographic hubs, which there are many schools like that, and there are specific reasons why they have access to certain types of research vessel or research assets that can be really useful for certain types of ocean science. That doesn't mean that they're the only schools who actually have full access to those resources, and it doesn't mean that those are the only schools that will provide you with meaningful room to be a good researcher or PhD student, provide good funding, have reasonable costs of living. So I think that's an important thing to think about when you're starting to pick on those different institutions.
Yeah, oh, and I want to say too, there are people doing great work in like schools all over the country, even ones that aren't on the coast. And even if they're not in departments called oceanography departments or something like that, you can find people who are doing what you're interested in a lot of different places. And everybody's doing great work everywhere. I don't really like hold that much value to name brands. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I've told a lot of my students this, but as much as I'd like to say marine science is completely objective, a lot of it is who you know. And so I had the opportunity, my undergrad advisor introduced me to Clint, who is a PhD student in the Sandin Lab while I was a senior in college. And he said, come on in, we'll have you as a volunteer, you know, you can work another job. So I spent a year nannying part-time and then working in the lab as a volunteer. And then they applied to PhD programs throughout that, just cold emailing professors saying, hey, I saw your website, I read this paper, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I've done, this is what I see my future being like, and got a lot of responses from that, got into a couple schools. But really it was the connection that I made after volunteering in lab. They brought me on a staff, and then having that connection with those people is really, like they said, it's applying to a person. And so it's creating a connection with that person rather than just having a good CV or a resume or personal statement. And I feel really thankful for that and deciding to go to Scripps, because I can't imagine starting in a new lab in the middle of a pandemic. So it's kind of going to be an easier transition for me in the sense that I know everyone and I've worked with them for a long time. But yeah, definitely my advice for finding an advisor is lean on your connections. I've told, again, my students this, you know, go to your advisor and say, hey, I'm applying to this school. Do you know anyone there? Could you make an introduction? Or, hey, I'm moving to this city. Do you know anyone there? Could you make an introduction? I think advisors are more than happy to do that. And it then looks good for them because they're like, oh, I raised this awesome student and now I'm sending them off somewhere else. And it kind of boosts their ego a little bit as well. So yeah, definitely depending on your connections, but then also like the faculty were saying, you know, when you email them, do your research. Don't send a generic email to every single professor. Say, hey, I read this paper that you studied this, and it aligns with my researcher here. Or I read this paper and I had a question here. One of the PhD advisors that accepted me had come and given a talk at Scripps, and I had like made the intentional decision to go to that talk and went up after and just kind of asked him a couple questions and then followed up with an email. Hey, we met at this talk. I'm applying to a PhD program at this school. Are you accepting grad students? So it's all about who you know, making connections. You guys, as being REU students, already have done that. And so push on those connections, but also don't be afraid to like cold email professors and follow up with them, because chances are they will not email back on their first email. So.
Yeah, and I would say, so I didn't have the benefit of leaning on like the connections I made in undergrad, except for those that I made at NOAA, and that's because I kind of jumped fields. So my cold emailing professors was really like, I didn't have anyone that could reach out to be like, hey, we have this, you know, student that's looking for a position. So my experience was I actually had a really hard time getting into grad school. It was a lot of, I think, a combination of like being really excited about fisheries and not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I wasn't finding the advisors that were, some are really excited about that and they're super gung-ho to be like, yeah, you can figure it out here. And for some reason, I kept finding advisors that were department chairs. And I think they were like, I can't baby this student. Like, she doesn't have a clear idea of what she wants to do yet. And so a lot of those people I met, and I think they rightfully so were like, this isn't a good fit. And then I also don't do what I did. I set a latitudinal bias because I was coming from California and I didn't want to deal with winter. And so I was only looking at schools on the West Coast or in Virginia and south of there, which is a shame because there's so many amazing fisheries schools in the Northeast. And so I was like finding some fits, they weren't great. And then there was one person I really wanted to work with at VIMS, Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. And he emailed back and he was like, I work for NOAA technically, so like unless you have your own funding, like I can't be your advisor, but let's just chat, like maybe you can help out. And so I was like, okay. So we had a phone call and we literally went through my list of schools. And he was like, you know, oh, like that school are having like money issues, like, you know, this school is actually pretty good. And so he kind of gave me some other ones to reach out to. And then a week later, he sent me an email and it was a call for a student from a new professor at Rutgers. And it was like some fish physiology project. And I've never done physiology. And I was like, that sounds cool. And so I like reached out to her and it was a really good fit. And it was a little scary because it's a gamble with the new professor. Like, they're not tenured. They might like have to leave in the time that you're there and they might suck. You have no idea. And so I went for it and it just ended up being like absolutely perfect. Like I wouldn't have gotten into physiology this way and I absolutely love it. And then ironically, I do now live somewhere with winter. So that did happen. So I guess my advice is to be really open, like much more open than I was. And also do not be dismayed by no's. A lot of my no's were like, I don't have money, or they see that you're not a good fit. And if they see that, it's not personal. It's just, you know, they've done, a lot of them have been in the game long enough that they can kind of see whether or not it's going to work. And you want to be with someone that's like excited to be your advisor too. So, and then I don't know, I feel like as you move on, you continue to get rejected from things and it just gets so much easier. Like, eventually you can kind of like disconnect it because I know it's kind of hard.
Elaine?
Yeah, so my faculty advisor or my undergrad advisor ended up just in one of like the last meetings that I had. Just as a timeline, I started looking at labs my senior fall. So around August, September is when I started looking and making myself a big list, like literally an Excel sheet with like all the information and faculty research area and a space for like, did you contact them? Did they respond to you or did they ignore you? So I actually have that pulled up just to refresh my memory of like all I did. And yeah, like Emily said, a lot of them ignored me or like said there's no money. So that definitely happens. And the way that I got to that list was I picked like my favorite papers and looked at the last author, looked at the author list on that, and just kind of contacted these head honchos who are publishing in high impact papers. Like no one's ever called me unambitious. So I was emailing a lot of fisheries people and a lot of marine ecology people. So a wide range of like applied versus basic marine ecology, but I kind of knew that I wanted to be somewhere working with fish and ecosystems. So cast a pretty wide net. And another thing that, another place I would look is science Twitter. I don't know how, I didn't really have this as an undergrad, but if you create like a professional Twitter for yourself and you follow, again, your favorite authors or your favorite scientists, they'll often retweet open PhD positions within the same field or of colleagues that they know. And like once you follow enough people, I think in your field, you'll see those opportunities pop up. And even now I see new labs coming up, new like PhD positions, new postdoc stuff like that. So it's another great resource is like kind of tapping into the fact that, yeah, there is a big networking part of this and Twitter is that network for a lot of PIs. So
to follow up on that, that's an awesome point. I think it's also, you can ask your supervisors, mentors, academics you admire what listservs they follow. because for the older generation, there is also a little bit, some people are great at Twitter, some people aren't, some people still love to have their inboxes flooded with emails every day. So, you know, like Inclusive SciComm will have some really great science communication posts. And if you sort of are looking to hone in on a specific field, like the Coral list, for example, is, you know, rife with PhD positions. So happy to talk about those more if people are interested.
Just to add a little bit, and something I had thought about when the faculty were speaking. So some of the faculty, you guys may remember, said that professionalism, you know, getting to know people in, I guess, via Zoom these days is really important for them to assess fit. And as I think back when I was applying to graduate programs, I got in some practice runs. So I come from Southern California, and there's like, you know, 20 different universities, many of which have professors that study marine science. So I had the benefit of like reaching out to professors that I didn't think we were a good fit, and I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be in their lab, but they were so friendly and they agreed to meet with me anyway. I got some practice talking and introducing myself, you know, I guess selling my brand as a larval biologist. So that's one way you guys could think about it too, right? As some of the other graduate students have alluded to, you're going to get some no's and you're going to have to contact a lot of people. But if you can think of it as practice rather than just rejection, for me, that made a big difference with my self-esteem. And I was much better prepared for the meetings that were really important to me, and that maybe, you know, the advisor came in with a much more critical eye. They're just people, some are friendlier than others. With that, I would love to open it up to student questions. If you guys are quiet, I'll
real quick to that.
Yeah.
So one thing that I will add is if a professor doesn't respond to your emails, there's a couple of reasons that might happen, but also be thinking about, do you want a professor that gets so many emails that they're not going to respond to you? So how professors, like, obviously they're judging you a bit by the emails you send, but also be looking at the emails, you know, how quickly they're responding, how much effort they're putting into responding. Even those first things, like an advisor fit is so important. And so if you're having an advisor who responds, yeah, let's meet at this time, you know, 10 minutes after you send the email, that's going to probably be an advisor that's more hands-on throughout the process. That, you know, whereas if you have a professor that responds, you know, I applied for a PhD program. I think I sent in the application in November. I started emailing this professor like the August before, and he got back to me the following July being like, yeah, I'd love to have you come visit my lab. And I'm like, no, like that's not going to work. So be paying attention as you exchange emails with professors. You guys want to be in a good fit position, and that's a two-way street. So make sure that the professors are responding to the emails that you guys are sending in ways that you think is going to be good as you move throughout your educational career.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are reading Carlos's question from the chat. Do you have any advice for looking into international schools? So for clarity, are you talking about as an international student looking at US schools or the other way around?
I was looking into from the US to outside, specifically Latin America, but also Europe, of course, is interesting.
I can say that, well, I don't know if I have super useful advice, but I can try. I I got my master's in the UK before starting my PhD. And part of my reasoning for that was that there was like specific funding available for that, right? So it was easy for me to say, okay, I can like take this available money and go have this experience in a field that I don't know anything about yet. So my master's is in earth sciences, in geochemistry. And it was a good opportunity to like explore this new field. The funding really narrowed down my focus of where I had to look for international opportunities. I can say I had a really good experience. I will say that some folks in the US, depending on the school and the program, view qualifications from outside the US differently from inside the US, and that's not right, but it's like something you might have to deal with. There are also like different dynamics depending on the degree program. So like in the UK, the PhD is a 3-year degree, which means you just get less time to publish during that degree. So it's good to think about like beyond just where you'll be during those years, what else will happen after those years. And in the UK, it's way more common to do 2 postdocs after your PhD. And in the US, it's more common to do 1 postdoc. So it all comes out in the wash, the time you spend in science. But there, like, I would look at differences in the foundational structures, not just in the context. I don't know if that's useful or not. I hope so.
That sounds useful to me. Could you guys talk a little bit about, so you know, we're talking about PIs and focus on PIs a lot, but what did you do to engage with your lab, and what have been priorities for you in the labs that you're working with right now, or what did you learn from labs you worked with in the past, and how did you get away from things that you weren't interested in participating in?
Rennie, could you say that again? I'm really sorry. Oh.
Yeah. How did you choose your lab, and was a lab a big factor for you in sort of the dynamics and the other people you'd be working with and studying with?
I can tackle that one just because I actually have 2 advisors. I'm co-advised, and so I'm a part of 2 labs, and I get to see how those different labs operate. I also have 1 very hands-on advisor and 1 very hands-off advisor. And as someone who like went straight into a PhD from undergrad, I really did need a more hands-on advisor who was able to direct me a little bit more my first 2 years. And so I've kind of leaned on one more than the other. And I will say, I think that, you know, obviously you want to pursue a graduate degree in a research topic that you're really interested in, but I have found that being in a PhD program is a lot easier when you're surrounded by good people. And I spend so much time with the same, I swear, like 8 people in grad school, that if those 8 people were unfriendly or were, you know, super research focused to the point where they didn't have a life, I think that would have been an unhealthy mindset for me to inherit and to go into. And so, you know, different labs have different reputations, and I really encourage you to talk to graduate students, because as a grad student, I think that in a lab, like, I'll tell it to you straight. You know, most of us, if not all of us, don't really have a vested interest in bringing in or keeping students out. And so we'll tell you exactly what the lab culture is like, what you can expect. A lab culture that I really like, that I'm a part of, is my lab. I'm like friends with all the people in my lab. We hang out. That means we like go to bars together. Ooh, like, you know, pre-COVID, we hang out together. We had a socially distanced going away party for our lab assistant. And I really enjoy that, because I think it shows that my advisor doesn't just care about me and my research output, but also cares about me in terms of my well-being, and like more holistically views me. So it's hard to find those people, but they exist. And I want, like, you don't need to have this conception that like your PI is just your boss. And, you know, I mean, my PI is also not my friend per se, but he did ask me at the end of my first year, you know, like, how are you adjusting to living in Rhode Island? Like, how are you doing mentally? And I think that was really nice. And I don't know if you're going to get that, honestly, from talking to, you know, the first cold call with an advisor. And so, or first Skype call with an advisor, but you can kind of, you know, like, I don't know of a better term, but you can read energy, or like, vibe. I think you can really tell how much an advisor cares about their students.
Yeah, for me, I wasn't necessarily looking at labs, but I had an idea of the type of advisor I might need. I am, how do I say this? I have a hard time with boundaries, and so I would need an advisor that is also like cares what's going on in my life and I care about what's going on in their life. And I'm not like, for me, that relationship is not just strictly professional. And everyone's super different and views it differently. And I just know like that's my personality. And so I remember like meeting some like potential advisors in person and joking with them, and they'd be like, I'd be like, oh, this is gonna work. Whereas like my advisor currently, like I babysit for her, I've house sat for her, like I go over and hang out with her and her family all the time. She gets me birthday presents, and like, so it's like that's something else like you might want to think about, because that is kind of where the you guys want to be on the same page there. So.
Yeah, and to add to that, talking to other grad students in the lab is so important. I applied to a lab, met with the professor. It was a great meeting. I was super excited. Messaged one of his grad students to Skype with her, and she pretty much was like, I love the lab, but he definitely treats the guys in the lab different than he treats the girls in the lab. And like, that's just something you need to know. And if that's something that's going to bother you, like, you just need to be aware of that. And so like getting, from what I saw of the professor, this is a great professor, my dream lab. And then hearing that of just the reality of what actually is happening in that lab was super helpful for me in making those decisions. Because again, if you're doing a PhD, you're committing to 5 or 6 years in this lab. And so you want to make sure it's a good fit. And yes, you can change and go through that process, but making sure it's a good fit rather than just trying to go into a lab because you want to go into a lab is important.
I want to tee up a couple of questions. So first, Stephen asks if there are some other red flags to look for when choosing an advisor. I think we addressed the other part of the question. And then Nikki, I'm having trouble scrolling, asked about presenters on the panel who are interested or know about applying science or science communication to improving social inequities through their work in grad school. And if you have seen these interdisciplinary interests discouraged among the science community. So we can get to that after. But red flags, anyone?
I can say one that like happened to me. There was a professor, I got invited to like fly out and visit the lab. And their research is amazing, and I was really, really excited. And it was one of those things where part of the trip was for me to just hang out with the lab group. And there was a pretty new PhD student, and he the entire time was like, because we were down at the field station visiting, this advisor was finally there for the first time in like months, and he was trying to hound him. He's like, if I don't talk to him today, like I don't know if I'm gonna ever be able to talk to him again, I'm drowning. And I was like, oh, this doesn't look good. So that was kind of a red flag for me, was the there's hands off and then there's like absent.
I agree with the hands-off versus absent thing. So before starting grad school, I was a lab tech in a couple different labs. And one person I worked for just literally wouldn't be there for like months at a time. And so I thought that hands-off equaled negligent, and it turns out that's not true. Like if you prefer an advisor who is hands-off, you can get that without having someone who's totally checked out. The other thing is that the same lab I teched in, the gender disparity in that lab was huge. So when I arrived, I was the only woman, and it was a lab of 20 men. And so if you see like huge disparities like that, there's probably a reason for it. And then the last one is, we've already talked about other current grad students talking about what a lab is like. And that can come from people in the lab, or sometimes people in the program who aren't actually in the lab. So if you want to work with a professor and they don't have any grad students, it might be because they're just new, or it might be because he's terrible to work for. And so other students in the same program can tell you about that. Well,
I'll also say, with the whole absent versus hands-off, I know a lot of people going into grad school are like, I just want to do field work the whole time. But also be aware that if your professor is engaging in field work, they're likely going to be out of service for months at a time. So, I mean, with my undergrad professor, my advisor he went to the field for 3 months at a time. And so I got used to kind of not talking to my advisor for 3 months and then having to kind of work independently. But if I hadn't had that experience, then going in and having an advisor who like leaves for 3 months at a time to go do his field work and sure has internet connection, but you know, it's sparse and you're not going to get those one-on-one meetings as much with him. Like be aware of that and weigh the pros and cons of that.
I want to add that the professor I had who was gone for months at a time was a synthetic organic chemist, no fieldwork.
If I could add something, you know, we've alluded to gender disparities in labs, but racial ones also exist. And it, you know, there's different levels of scale. So for where I'm at, the University of Oregon's Marine Station OIMB, our grad community, pretty diverse. Faculty, 1 female, 6 men. The town is like the whitest place I've ever been. And I know that I struggled with that, especially moving from Southern California at first. But we've also had prospective students, you know, we as the grad community welcomed them in, showed them around. And I know for a fact, one of them was like, I just don't feel comfortable living here. It's just not what I was looking for. So that's something else that you can ask graduate students about, particularly if they are not from that place originally. But right, it's not just, you're going to spend a lot of time in lab. I don't want to say you won't, but you're also going to live in that community, you know, eat out there, shop there, make friends there. So that's another component to keep your eyes wide open about.
Cool, and we can also maybe start to dig into Nikki's question a bit. They asked about applied science and science communication for improving social inequities. I know that Elaine does a lot of work on this front. Is a lab that does a lot of this work. I went to the same University of Rhode Island for my master's, which was in marine affairs, which is a policy and governance degree. There were also management degrees. And so I guess one thing that I just want to flag for folks is that you don't have to go to a science program to continue having your hands on science. And so if you're curious about other methodologies or ways of looking at the world, policy degrees, even like media and communications degrees, if you're interested in sort of getting real technical skills along those lines, can be super useful, especially if you're sort of looking at applying the types of science that Emily's doing and sort of working on pushing it from the result to implementation. Sometimes it is really useful to get that policy framework and get a sense of what those communities look like and how they think. That said, I would say that from the NSF perspective and from my experience elsewhere in other institutions, a lot, and certainly on Twitter, there's a lot of focus on science communication. There's a lot of focus on having the broader impacts of your work really not be a second thought and be central to the way that you conduct your science, and understanding that the money and resources and time that you're spending doing the science are real world valuable things that can impact the communities in which you work. Whether or not that's, you know, the lab community, the city or town where your university is, or wherever else you're actually conducting your field work. So there's always going to be that opportunity to think about place and where you are and how you're doing what you're doing. And I think a good question then to ask your supervisors or your potential mentors as you're looking at programs is, you know, will I have time? Will you let me have time? Can I set aside 3 hours a week to do volunteering? Or am I only going to get hands-on experience with teaching through teaching and through, you know, the things that I have to do through a TA-ship? And that's something that you might want to think about for yourself as you look for supervisors.
Yeah, I'll say you definitely want a PI who supports science communication or other diversity and inclusion work if that's what you're interested in, because whether or not, like I've been told whether or not I like it, I will be punished in some way for spending a lot of my time and energy in that area. And punished not as in like reprimanded. Fortunately, I have a pretty open department like towards these initiatives, but you know, punished in terms of my time, you know, maybe how other students or in faculty view me, like those stigmas can arise. So I have, you know, like kind of not conflicting views about this, but I would say tread kind of lightly if this is something you're interested in, but also, you know, make sure that you talk about it. Another thing is in terms of interdisciplinary interests in general, I have a pretty interdisciplinary PhD. There's like some genomics bits, there's marine, like community ecology theory. And one of my committee members said that an interdisciplinary PhD is not great for academia because it shows a lot of breadth and not depth in a subject matter. I don't know if that's true. I mean, he's like an old fart, so maybe it is true. And that's something that I would keep in mind if, you know, you want your PhD to, like as a dissertation chapter, include science communication. So I've heard a little bit of pushback on that. Fortunately, again, I don't really see myself in academia, so this is not really a problem for me. And I know that, you know, there have been a lot of conferences and workshops for faculty and scientists to be more open to interdisciplinary science, but there's still this like pretty old way of thinking about it. So
I don't like, just to add, and when you're thinking of advisors too, that's sometimes where learning about department culture is also really important. So at Rutgers, so our marine sciences department, like the grad students banded together to basically write like a list of demand suggestions that we should start to take to improve the community in within our department. And my department was really responsive. Like, we've already started, we've creating committees, and like we just disbanded the GRE. Like, there's all these things that we're starting to do. And grad students from other departments saw our email and sent it to their like grad students, be like, hey, we should maybe draft our own version of this. And some department heads got really pissed and were like, you're trying to ruffle feathers, like we're doing fine, like we're trying our best. Like, it became like drama in some other departments. So sometimes it is also like, it's very department specific. But if it's something that's really important to you, I highly suggest pursuing it and finding the place that basically that means like the place where you can really blossom and trying to do this work, that's the right fit for you. And I would say even in academia, I've talked to my advisor about this as I've started to spend more time on it. And my whole stance is, if I'm gonna continue on in academia, like I need to do better than what other people have been doing. And so in a sense, this is training and incredibly important to like work on now. And it is worth my time, and it is gonna help me in academia later. But again, I found a supportive advisor in department, and I think that's why it's easier.
Yeah, and I can echo that. Again, like talking to grad students, I mean, our lab, you know, we have lab meeting every week, and there was a conversation on race that was moderated by the UCSD leads group. And so, you know, our entire lab said, we're going to go to this conversation instead of having lab meeting. And so talking, like, that's a very real question, kind of going back to what Nicole was saying about race disparities and gender disparities in lab. That's a very real question that you can ask both the professor you're looking at working at, but also the grad students, saying, you know, what initiatives have you done in response to the Black Lives Matter protest? What initiatives have you done? You know, asking those questions. And if they don't have an answer for you, that tells you something. If that's something that you place a lot of importance on in your lab. So like our lab, we have a book club that we're doing right now, reading different books about racial injustice. And so being able to, we have those practical things in our lab, and that's something that attracted me to the lab that I'm working in. But if a lab doesn't have that, it may also say something about that lab. And if that's important to you, definitely take that into account.
I'd also say
spending 5 to 6 years there, you want it to be, like Elaine said, people you get along with, people that you can have those conversations with.
I would also say, if you know that there are specific types of engagement or communication work that you want to do, or NGOs that you want to work with that you are super excited about, lots of those NGOs or offices have offices across the country that are co-located with universities, or they have communication institutions, or they have some sort of public-private partnership. And it's worth considering all the other assets that are part of the university system or in the same geography that you're going to be able to access. So in the case of URI, there's a Nature Conservancy office, there's an EPA office, there's a NOAA office, all co-located in the same part of the state. And that allows you to have a very quick walk or drive between those offices to get those internships that help you figure out if you like actually doing that work, or if you are then more interested in pursuing the academic track in that science, letting you pivot more quickly. and have those sorts of references too that can speak to your diversity of skills. We're coming up on the end of our session, and there's still some questions in the chat. Would you guys be okay if we shared your emails with the students so they could maybe email you directly? Sweet. Thank you guys so much. Nicole, is there anything else you wanted to ask before we wrap?
I know the
no.
question had a lot of like pluses. From what I've heard, a lot of schools aren't doing the GRE, but also it's high school level math, so don't stress out about it too much. And as you heard from a lot of the faculty, like the GRE is kind of just like a check in the box. The other stuff, from my experience, is a lot more important. So,
agreed. I don't have any strong feelings about like questions. I can just read from the Slido, but I would love for students to ask if they have a burning question. Maybe somebody who hasn't already asked a question.
I can answer Blake's really quick.
Sure.
In terms of what I'm going to do after, so in trying to stay in academia, my goal is after to start looking for postdocs. So a lot of postdocs, like opportunities, are kind of rolling, and they arise when like PIs or advisors get funding. But a lot of times they are semi-synced with like the natural school year. And then if you're looking for fellowships within a department, those are also usually synced with the school year. So likely next fall, I'll start applying for fellowships to try to get some of my own money and like start looking. And then pretty much my last year of grad school, I'll be like trying to finish and look for postdocs at the same time.
I guess some parting pieces of advice for like the seniors and also the juniors in this cohort is that you're on the right track if you're thinking about grad school right now. You're not late. You're not like behind if you feel lost. I was lost the whole time I was applying to grad school because you are actually just sending and waiting on emails, which is so nebulous. There's really no structure. Like you just send an email and then you wait. And so your fall semester will be a lot of that. One sentence that I think you should include in your cold email always at the end is, do you have time to talk with me over the phone or via Skype to discuss my qualifications and my grad school plans? That way it's not like, I want to join your lab, but it's more like you're seeking advice from them or you're seeking insight from them. And then from that, you can, kind of suss out fit. And so it's okay if you feel lost. There's there's no portal like there was for undergrad for all of this. And it does feel very informal, and that's just because it is. So the confusion, I think, all of us felt that way applying.
Also, if you end up not applying and you take a time away from school and you apply like 5-10 years later, that is so fine. There are a lot of people in my program that are in their 30s that decided that it was best that they go back to school. So whatever you decide does not lock you into anything. So just at some point, you just kind of got to feel with the way that life is tugging you, and anything's okay.
Yeah, if I can add something, I had 2 gap years before I started my master's. And what I did was volunteer and work at various institutions where I was able to cross things off the list. So you guys might have heard from the faculty, right, that they're looking for a student who knows has an idea of a specific idea of what they want to study, and hopefully that matches what they study, and that's why you'd be a good fit, yada, yada. So think of opportunities that can help you narrow down your interests. So then you can come from a really honest place of clarity when you write to these professors that you do have a specific interest, you have experience, that you like it, yada, yada. So do we have any other student questions? You guys can just speak up. Well, with that, then I'm gonna let our very busy graduate students go. And if you could all give them a round of applause as thank you again for all they've had to share with us. And again, we're gonna ask for their emails. You guys can follow up with them if you think of something later or have a specific question for one of our panelists. You know, my door is always open, so to speak, also if you have questions. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming today, and please reach out if you have any questions moving forward. Oh, students, next week is a career panel. So you've heard about one possible path you can take post-undergrad, and next week we're gonna hear from many different careers.
So quickly hype that up. We've got someone from an environmental consulting group who's a great guy who he's adjunct at Duke, but he also helps work on vessels that do science that suss out how offshore wind is going to impact benthic worms. We've got someone who works at the NOAA Marine Mammal Labs, who's been in government for decades. We've got someone who works at a think tank in DC who has worked in State Department environmental quality departments and decided to take the policy track. We've got a Nat Geo journalist. Am I missing anybody? Oh, we've got someone who's a postdoc with the American Museum of Natural History. So it'll be really fun. I think they'll all have lots of really interesting things to say, and we'll send out an email soon with their names and a place to submit questions. So thanks everybody, and have a great weekend.
Bye guys.
Thank you.
Thanks guys.